Thank you very much to DEPASA for allowing me to come and do a presentation today. I greet you all. I'm happy that you are here. I hope you're enjoying Cape Town. If you've never been here before, I will say all protocol observed because I'm not very good at remembering names. I just want to say I'm very tempted to respond to every presentation that was done, but I'll keep it to myself and focus on my presentation. Before I start, I always say, my name is Wilma. I use South African Sign Language. The voice that you hear is the voice of my sign language interpreter, Trudy, because sometimes in the audience there might be people who are blind and they think it's me speaking. It's not my voice. So, and also if this goes out to the radio, people know that I use sign language. I also want to say, I am not an education specialist. I'm not an expert in education. I'm a social worker. But as a social worker, I see the things and the results accumulated from education. Now, before I really go into my presentation, I want to thank the previous speakers. I came back from America studying at Gallaudet at a time of change in South Africa in 1994. I had the privilege to vote in Washington, D.C. during that time. In 1994, I thought they were ready for the change in South Africa, but they were not. There were a lot of barriers, as was already said. There was a lot of resistance. Maybe I was too vocal, I don't know. As a social worker, I specialized in studying the development. And social workers were not ready for development. They were still thinking welfare, helping the disabled, helping the deaf. They can't think for themselves. And our Constitution talks about the Bill of Rights, and when we teach the Bill of Rights to children, the teachers prevent them and the principals and say they're never going to come to these camps again because they do not want the children to be vocal. And today you are faced with children who have an opportunity to read what's happening on social media, talking about human rights. It speaks about the rights of children, how you can lobby, get together and protest. And as teachers and educators, we need to be ready for that when you speak to your children. I'm very happy to hear all the presentations saying that you need to speak to the children. Plus, I will add that you need to speak to the deaf community. You must speak to the deaf adults as well, because they've had experience in the education sector, in deaf education. I'm not going to repeat everything, but because some of the things have already been said, so thank you for your presentation, that's what I wanted to say. And then after me, there will be, Mudieki will speak about SASL implementation, but I'll speak to you about the fighting we had to go through to get South African Sign Language on an equal footing. What I did not prepare in my presentation, but Dr. Similani's presentation I thought about, I'm glad that you mentioned accommodation and concession. I'm glad you said that. I have 2 hearing children, and I've been looking at their education. My eldest boy glided through school. The teachers saw him as one of the best in the group that they've ever had in primary and high school. Then my daughter was the rebellious one because she had learning difficulties. My daughter needed accommodations and concessions. I never knew about it, never heard about that. But I had to pay for her to see an educational specialist, and I had to pay for her to get a letter of concession I had to pay. I was able to afford it, yes, but many parents cannot afford it. And I want to ask the department what you are doing about that, because many children drop out right through from grade R to 12. All children, hearing and deaf, doesn't matter, they drop out because we did not accommodate them. What are we doing about that? And I want the department to look at that, especially in schools for the deaf as well, and schools for disabled children, farm children. They are left out because they're not paying attention in class. They can't cope. So accommodation and concession, what we are doing if the parents cannot afford to pay specialists. South African Sign Language was finally approved after years and years lobbying, years and years of talking, years and years of going to Parliament, to the Constitutional Review Committee, finally officialized, but the work is not done. The work continues. This is very important because when the President was the chair of the Human Research Development Council, he said that we welcome the fact that the issue of South African Sign Language and deaf education is on the agenda. For too long, this has been an area of education and training that has been neglected, both in policy and practice. Unless we attend to sign language and deaf education, a significant portion of our people will remain excluded from meaningful economic participation by virtue of disability. This is very, very true, even today. And I just wanted to focus on this quickly before I hand over. Why are we still fighting? Why are we still talking about this? Why, even if SAZL is official and it's there, why are we still doing this? Deaf people still remain marginalized. Their access to basic quality education is still being marginalized. That's why I'm happy that Dr. Simelane spoke about equal education for everyone, including the deaf. The voice of the deaf community is still excluded. I'll get to the implementation part of that later. Matters related to language and education for the deaf is still led by hearing people. And it's not that we have anything against hearing people, we just need deaf people to partner with you. Literacy rates, literacy. I love reading, and it's sad for me when deaf people do not want to read. They prefer to use sign language, videos, they don't want to do text messages, and I hope Jabbar tomorrow will speak more about that. What we experience, especially me as a social worker, and DEPSA as social workers, when deaf people who have finished school come to the DEPSA office and they can't fill in a CV. What is going wrong with our educational system that deaf people who have matric cannot write a CV? Something is wrong. They can't read, they can't write, what is it? So we do need to look at that. Academic opportunities and career paths are very limited. It is quite limited. Our education system, especially at deaf schools, what are we doing about that? I'm also glad that others spoke about the international treaties that we have. It's international treaties that we have to follow, and sometimes there's one line that South Africa might not like and we want to change it, but unfortunately when it comes to Parliament can't make any changes. They can only discuss and ratify treaties. So sometimes, like inclusive education, but what about our deaf schools? You're saying there's 44 deaf schools, but what about them? Do we have to close them now? And I would not support that, because I would like deaf schools to remain. And I'm proud of the fact that South Africa has so many schools for the deaf. But the treaties we sign speak about inclusivity. So there's different ways. So we have the Schools Act, luckily, our own law, that deaf schools will remain. So just briefly, just to mention why we were lobbying for South African Sign Language to become official. It's for accessibility, equality, international obligations that we had to meet, and economic benefits. There is an economic benefit in South African Sign Language being official, but you need to work with the deaf community and not marginalize the deaf community. The UN Convention was already mentioned. I hope that you all read that. There are articles in it. Article 2, 9, 21, 24, specifically relating to education, and Article 30. Lobbying for these articles was the World Federation for the Deaf. Unfortunately, Ingrid isn't here. She was a previous member of DEPASA. She is working now for the World Federation for the Deaf. And we congratulate her and her work for the WFD, that they always partner with DEPASA as well to get things implemented. The reason why I put this slogan here is that I cannot leave this platform without talking for the deaf. Talking for the deaf, talking for the deaf who won't, you're scared of the department because you're scared of your jobs. I don't know why our deaf adults will not speak out, because some of them are in the deaf schools, they have a fear of losing their jobs. You have workers' rights, you have human rights, but the deaf are so scared to speak out, and I do not understand why this is. So nothing about us without us is very important for us. That is a slogan from Disabled People South Africa. And that slogan is something that all of us can use, and we have to accept this. And government acknowledges it. But our deaf adults are scared, they're afraid to speak out. So I want to say, be the voice here, work with deaf adults. You have over 100 deaf teacher assistants, but where are they? What are they doing? They're cleaners, they're changing nappies, they're looking after kids in the hostel. They're not used to the maximum as deaf teacher assistants. And when you talk about implementation of South African Sign Language in schools, please use those deaf teacher assistants. Maybe in future, Dr. Similani, you can change their titles to sign language experts or sign language professionals. Maybe change that name, because really they are there to assist the teachers who cannot sign. So I'm pleading with you, use your deaf adults in your schools and the deaf teacher assistants, and ask all the all the provincial and national Department of Education to educate our deaf teacher assistants as well. I read all these presentations are wonderful people who come, but only 3 of them are deaf. And all 3 of us are not specialists in education. We don't specialize in education. I'd like to see someone come on stage who's a deaf person themselves, who majored in education. Yes, we have a few, but why do we have a few? Why are our children, now with their 5th matric, NCS 5th SASL exam, encouraged to become teachers of the deaf and specialize in SASL? Use them. Why can't they access university? There's another reason why we are fighting for SASL to become official, because universities refuse to accept English only or Afrikaans only. But their first language is SASL, and the universities refuse to accept it. So that's why we had to work to make sign language official. And once that is successful, I'm hoping that the colleges and universities will start accepting it as an official language, and one of the 2 languages that deaf learners can bring. Dr. Similani, the department needs to work with the Department of Higher Education as well to make sure that universities, TVET colleges, make it possible for the deaf. You can access education to study further, but the deaf still today have barriers. And why must DEPASA fight with the colleges to make sure that there's interpreters present? Why can the department not make it accessible? Why can't the universities work together? Because DEPASA is always the one who fights, and they're always the scapegoat, always, because we have to fight. But our job doesn't end with SASL being official. We still have to fight to make sure that our deaf learners who finish matric get a quality, high education equal to that of my hearing children. And because they have SASL, they can access university without discrimination, without being discriminated against, and access further education and make it easier. Something I'd like to tell you, I do not want to criticize, but I want you to be aware. Like the question that was asked, can I tender while working for the department? Can I do work? It's a similar example. At universities, we had one interpreter who set up her own business. I don't know if the university knew about it, if she declared it in the university, but she was never at the university to interpret for the deaf student. She was never there. Or either came late, so the student missed a lot of what the teacher said about exams, and homework, etc. At the end, that student came to DEPASA crying. And it ended up that DEPASA's interpreter had to go with that deaf person to meet each lecturer, and they didn't know about it. They never knew. And he said, but why did you not tell me before? Because she was too scared. She was too scared if she speaks out, the interpreter will never interpret for her again. Or anymore. So, you know, when we talk about these things, think about ethics as well. And doing business. I am a teacher, but now I also become an interpreter and earn money as an interpreter while I'm supposed to teach. So, you know, check if you have interpreters there. Are they there in the morning? Are the deaf students suffering, or are the deaf students excelling? Is the interpreter asking for a lot of money, then the colleges can't afford it? Then they let the interpreter go and tell the deaf person to look at captions if they have that system. So think about these things and look at that. You as educators also need to engage with the university. Sometimes the schools say, oh, our work is done, you've done the matric, that's it. Don't come to us for help, that's it, it's done. It shouldn't be like that. You are part of the deaf person's journey through life. And make sure that a person who just left school, for the first time they're facing the world of work, that you also assist and you also involve them and you also make sure that the deaf community is there to consult with. You know, unfortunately there's not a lot of deaf people who heard what Dr. Naika said or Prof. Naika said. Because that kind of presentation is what deaf people need. They always miss out. So I'm hoping that Professor Naika is not doesn't accept our invitation. We don't have money to pay you because you're retiring, but if we invite you to speak to deaf people, that would be great as well. Madam Chairperson, I will stop here because I would like to give over the rest of my time to Susan. And if there's any questions, I'll be around until the end of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We welcome Susan and then we'll call you back on stage again. Thank you, Susan.